at linebacker. People just drooling, raving about Isaiah Simmons. He seems to be a pretty obvious choice. Kenneth Murray was a tackling machine at Oklahoma, and with their issues on defense, if he didn't make the tackle, nobody would half the time. Your rundown of the linebackers with Simmons at 1, Murray at 2, Patrick Queen, LSU, a couple LSU players in the top 5 with Jacob Phillips checking in. Zach Bond was a player who made a lot of disruptive plays in the backfield in the Big Ten for Wisconsin.
Yeah, Zach Bond is, I think, one of these hybrid kind of guys. I think depending on who you ask around the league, some people like him as an edge rusher. I think he could also play off-ball linebacker, but he's a candidate now to hear his name called in the first round. I truly believe that just based on the buzz that I'm hearing about Zach Bond. And Kenneth Murray to me is a guy that you heard how well he interviewed at the combine. And just an intangibles guy. They got him on the chalkboard. I mean, this guy's football IQ is through the roof. You saw Coach Matt Rule after that Baylor game against Oklahoma go up to Lincoln Riley and kind of just say, hey, man, that linebacker Murray you got is incredible. So maybe that's something to keep an eye on when the Panthers come up on the clock. And then Simmons, I had a hard time pegging him in that top 10. I know we're going to talk some Cleveland Browns. In the NFL Draft Bible publication, I have Simmons going to the Browns at number 10, where I think he could play multiple positions, similar to what Jabril Peppers offered there for the Browns. I do like Simmons more as a linebacker than a safety. I think, he could be a little bit more vulnerable at the NFL level. Just everybody's faster, quicker. To put him out at safety at a full-time position, I think might be a liability. But, I mean, this guy, I think he had like 237 snaps in the slot, just covering guys. So, I mean, he is the, ultimate executioner of defense, plays multiple positions. And, I think that when you draft an Isaiah Simmons, yeah, it's a great talent to have, but you got to kind of really identify how he's going to fit into your defensive scheme and really plan around that. And I think if he gets into a position where he's linked up in the right system, the right coaches, and they have a defined game plan for Isaiah Simmons, there's no doubt outside of Chase Young, I mean, he could turn out to be the best player in this year's draft.
And there's so many levels to what you do as you kind of combed through that in regards to ranking the players at the position, then kind of giving them a rating because there are obviously levels. You might have 3 guys that are really, really good, razor thin right at the top. Then you may have a drop off. And then when you got to combine all the positions together to rank them 1 through a zillion, and then match that up against team need and draft order to figure out, okay, are they going to, this is the best player available, but they don't need a tackle. They're going to go somewhere else. And that's probably a bad example. Everybody needs tackles. But you know what the deal is in regards to that. How many of these teams seem to be drafting, leaning best player available regardless? We want the best impact player versus, man, we've really got a hole here and we're going to fill it, so we're going to reach.
It's interesting because there's so many different philosophies in drafting a team, and I'm a firm believer, take the best available talent. You can never have too many good players, and anytime I can add a blue chip guy, and like Simmons is a perfect example to use, like, hey, I might not have a need at linebacker, I might not have a need at safety, and maybe it goes across with what I just said. You better have a game plan for him, but at the same time, at the end of the day, it's like, hey, what are you looking for? I'm looking for talent. So I want to accumulate the best players. And even if it's quarterback, like I'm a big subscriber to the Bill Walsh philosophy, draft a quarterback every year, because if you have good quarterbacks, you have equity. And Bill Belichick is a subscriber too, because he takes a quarterback almost every year. Jarrett Stidham last year, and he's flipped these guys: Jacoby Brissett, Jimmy Garoppolo, Matt Castle. The list goes on and on. He's flipped these guys for draft picks. And anytime you have good quarterbacks, you've got draft equity waiting in your back pocket, and that's why you just got to accumulate talent, no matter what position it is. But there are teams that defer from, like, if I'm the Redskins, right? Say Chase Young, we're not on the board for some reason. Why not take a quarterback and trade off a guy that the Eagles did it when they had Bradford and Wentz, and the Chiefs did it when they had Alex Smith and Patrick Mahomes. Like, there's no such thing as having too many good quarterbacks. And again, the Bill Walsh philosophy, whether it was Joe Montana, Steve Young, Steve Bono, Elvis Gerback, I mean, there was always quarterbacks being developed. And that's why San Francisco, man, they always were competing because they never had an issue at quarterback. You look at the common denominator of playoff teams in the NFL, they've all got a good quarterback.
And then some of those Bill Walsh disciples went to Green Bay, and they did the same thing. They stockpiled guys behind Brett Favre that later became stars on other teams like Mark Brunell and Ty Detmer and others. Good system there. I'm looking at these linebackers going again, the deep dive way down the chain, and I'm seeing guys that popped up in college football as stars all over the place with Khaleke Hudson of Michigan at 21. You've got Joe Bachie, Michigan State, who was just, a guy that just ate up tackles at number 27. Shaq Quarterman, the Miami duo, number 32, and Michael Pinckney at 50. Tay Crowder, a Georgia product, at 51. Jordan Mack at Virginia at number 30. Any out of those guys? Because those guys jump out at me because, again, college football, they played a lot. Most of those guys played from the time they stepped on campus and just accumulated play after play at big schools.
Jordan Mack is a guy, when I went into Virginia early on in the season, I said, sitting next to the guy in the press box, I'm like, who's this guy? Mack, making all these plays. He's big, he's strong, he's physical. And then, after the season, I think he had a little cleanup on the ankle, a little injury there. And then, from my understanding, this guy is like a rocket scientist. He is, I forget what his major is, but I mean, he's got job offers already, like 6 figures. So, I'm not so sure that he's going to take up the NFL. We'll see. The Miami guys are interesting because you talk about immediate impact players and Michael Pinckney and Shaq Quarterman. These guys stepped on campus from day one and have started the last 4 years. I think that, Pinckney's time speed is a little concerning, as was Quarterman's, I believe, offhand. But I think, Shaq, I got a chance to meet him at ACC Media Day. Man, I could not get this guy to crack a grin or smile. I mean, talk about strictly business. But that's kind of like what I want from my middle linebacker, just a guy that's no nonsense. Can't get him to crack a smile. All business all the time. That is Shaq Quarterman. And, Bachie from Michigan State, I think there's some off-the-field issues there that, he's probably been hurt from this draft process and not being able to meet with the teams and kind of getting to know him there. So I think he'll probably have to make his way undrafted. But talk about a guy who could go undrafted and emerge as a potential starter down the road. He's got all the intangibles there to do that. And then, one guy I will throw out there, Logan Wilson from Wyoming, has got a little bit of a buzz about him. And he just plays with his hair on fire, sideline to sideline, lateral quickness, tackle machine. Logan Wilson from Wyoming. Don't be surprised if you hear his name called as early as round 2.
All right, folks, we got Rick Saratel on the line from NFL Draft Bible, so take advantage. We've got some comments coming in that we'll get to in just a second when we finish up with the edge rushers. Again, the wild card out there. Who's that guy out there or two that you really like but could be a boomer, a bust? Those guys under the radar that you feel could make a splash in their NFL careers.
I'm going to go really digging in the crates here because there's a guy out in North Greenville, Chauncey Haney, that I want to talk about. And nobody's speaking about this man right now, but we had him out at the NFLPA Bowl in Pasadena, and I had scouts tell me that they could see him going as high as round 5. Now, he wasn't invited to the NFL Combine, but this guy is lean, he's long, he's mean, he's quick, he's agile. Again, very raw, coming from the smaller school level. There's also a guy down in James Madison University, Rondell Carter, who I like a lot, transfer from Rutgers, so he has that Power 5 pedigree. And I think, between Rondell Carter and Broderick Washington from Texas Tech, I think these are 2 guys that folks really aren't talking about that could start at the next level. And, Rondell Carter's intriguing because he could play inside, he could play outside, and he's just been on a tear, at the FCS level the last 2 years. A big reason why James Madison has had so much success. So I'm going small school on your mark there.
People might be surprised that I've actually watched and probably know more about the history of the NFL than I do college football, but we've locked in on college football here, so we take it from that angle. And so there's a number of interesting things to look at the rankings versus the guys getting drafted. And when you watch these guys for 2 to 3 years and see them making plays in big games, and then you see these no-name guys getting drafted ahead of them. People are always shrugging their shoulders like, why didn't you take the guy from Florida State? That's the guy that everybody knows. The two Florida players are a good comparison here. Jonathan Grenard and also Jabari Zuniga. And Zuniga actually ran a better 40 time. And so, again, you got a comparison of two guys that played together, same position. Not one of them was like crazy productive versus the other guy. So why the separation there? Number 9 for Greenard, and you got Zuniga at 15.
Yeah, I think Zuniga was kind of on our radar coming into the season. We kind of expected him to take a step up and be a little bit more dominant this season. We didn't really see him do that. And Greenard, I think, is just based on potential. And when you get into edge rushers and projecting how they're going to develop at the next level, you're kind of trying to predict, you know, who has the athletic traits that you're looking for. And I think Greenard is a guy that if you took the injuries out of the equation, and he's had quite a handful of them, I think, you know, he could be potentially the best pass rusher in this year's draft class. But, you know, the one concerning thing that NFL teams are going to be a little bit frightened about is at one point he actually considered retiring from the game altogether and quitting because of his injury. So anytime you hear that, teams get a little bit on edge. How much does he love the game? Is he really passionate about football? But he did have some injury history there. I just think from an athletic standpoint, the size, speed, and potential, that Greenard is going to be more appealing to NFL scouts. But, you know, both of those guys, middle rounds, you know, rounds 3 through 5, I could see them coming off the board.